On the morning of November 9, 1932, the wife of the most powerful man in the Soviet Union was found dead in her Kremlin apartment, a small pistol beside her. The regime announced she had died of appendicitis and buried the truth for decades. This is the story of Nadezhda Alliluyeva's last hours, and the night Stalin's marriage ended in blood behind the red walls. To understand how she died, you have to understand where she came from, because Nadezhda Alliluyeva was not an outsider to the revolution, she was born inside it. She came into the world on the 22nd of September 1901 in Baku, on the oil-soaked shores of the Caspian Sea. Her father, Sergei Alliluyev, was a revolutionary, an electrician, a committed Bolshevik, a man who had risked everything for the underground struggle against the Tsar. The Alliluyev household was a safe house for radicals, a place where hunted men could sleep, eat, and disappear again into the night. One of those hunted men was Joseph Stalin. The family later told a story, perhaps softened, perhaps true, that when Nadia was just a small child, Stalin had pulled her from the sea near Baku after she tumbled from an embankment. He saved her life, they said. A revolutionary saving a revolutionary's daughter. It reads almost like a fable, and like many fables, it would curdle into something much darker. Nadia grew up steeped in Marxist ideals. She was serious, intelligent, and proud, a girl who believed, genuinely believed, in the cause her family bled for. Those who knew her described a modest young woman with a stubborn streak of principle, someone who did not flatter and did not pretend. She had a dark, oval face, upturned nose, and grave eyes, the kind of person who took the promises of the revolution literally, as though they were meant to be kept. When the Bolsheviks seized power in October 1917, she was 16 years old, watching the old world burn and the new one rise. And then, in the chaos of revolution and civil war, she married the man her father had once sheltered. They married around 1919. Nadia was 17, perhaps 18. Stalin was 40, a widower, whose first wife, Kato, had died young, leaving him with a son, Yakov. The age gap was more than 20 years. To some it looked like devotion. To others, like a girl swept up by the gravity of a rising revolutionary star. In the early years, there was something like tenderness. Their surviving letters carry affectionate nicknames, small jokes, a longing when they were apart. She went to work as a secretary, first in Lenin's office, then in her husband's orbit. She was inside the machine of Soviet power, close enough to touch its levers. They had 2 children, a son, Vasily, born in 1921, a daughter, Svetlana, born in 1926, a girl her father would dote on, at least while the world was still simple. But the tenderness did not last. Stalin was cold. He was crude. Witnesses described a man who could be casually cruel to the woman who shared his home, dismissive, controlling, indifferent to her feelings in front of others. He was consumed by work and by power, and he treated his wife less like a partner than like a fixture of the apartment. And Nadia was not a woman built to be a fixture. She suffered terribly. Severe headaches tormented her, blinding, recurring pain that some around her linked to a fragile nervous condition. She was prone to dark moods, to what those close to her called deep depressions. Her health, physical and emotional, was brittle, and her marriage was steadily grinding it thinner. Those who lived near the family watched the pattern set in and harden. She would sink into long silences that could last for days, shutting the doors of herself against everyone, including her own small children. Then the mood would lift, and she would throw herself back into study and duty with a feverish, almost frantic discipline, as though work could hold the dark at bay. Some who knew the family whispered of a weakness of the nerves that ran in the Alliluyev blood, an inherited fragility she could not outrun. Whatever its source, it kept her living close to an edge, and the man she had married did nothing to pull her back from it. He mocked her studies, he belittled her in front of guests, and when she wept, he saw only weakness, never pain. As early as 1926, she had reached a breaking point once before. She left, taking the children to Leningrad away from him, but she came back, whether out of love, duty, fear, or the sheer impossibility of walking away from a man like Stalin. She returned to the Kremlin, to the marriage, to the cage. By the end of the 1920s, Nadia was trying to build something that was hers alone. In 1929, she enrolled at the Industrial Academy in Moscow. She studied there under her maiden name, Alliluyeva, not Stalina, trying for once to be judged as herself and not as the wife of the General Secretary. She was drawn to technical study. Accounts mention synthetic fibers engineering, the practical science of building the new industrial state. For a woman suffocating inside the Kremlin, the academy was air. It was a life with her own name on it, her own classmates, her own conversations. She would ride the ordinary tram to her lectures, refusing the chauffeured car, insisting on being treated as a student like any other. To the people around her, she was simply a serious, slightly stern woman in her 30s, not the second most watched wife in the country. It was perhaps the only place in her adult life where she was ever truly anonymous, and she guarded it fiercely. But those conversations would poison everything, because the students at the Industrial Academy were ordinary Soviet people, and ordinary Soviet people, in 1932, knew things that the Kremlin did not say out loud. They came from the villages. They had families in the countryside, and the countryside in those years was dying. Among her classmates was a blunt, ambitious provincial party man named Nikita Khrushchev, who would remember her warmly for the rest of his life. But most of the others were not future leaders. They were sons and daughters of the soil, people who had left their villages only a year or two before and who still received letters from home. Those letters carried the truth. In the corridors and the canteen, between lectures on chemistry and synthetic fiber, Nadia heard the things that never reached the pages of Pravda. Whole districts stripped of grain, families eating seed corn and then eating nothing, requisition brigades hauling the last sack out of a starving house. She heard it not as statistics, but as the ordinary grief of ordinary people standing right beside her. This was the era of forced collectivization, the violent seizure of peasant land, the crushing of resistance, the ruthless extraction of grain from a starving countryside. Across Ukraine, the Volga, and Kazakhstan, famine was taking hold, and it would eventually claim millions of lives. It was policy, it was deliberate, and it was her husband's. The whispers reached Nadia through her fellow students, stories of hunger, of horror, of villages emptied of the living. She reportedly confronted Stalin with what she had heard. His response by some accounts was fury and an order to purge the very academy she attended. For a true believer, this was a particular kind of agony. Nadia had not married into the revolution the way other women married into money or rank. She had been born to it. She had carried its faith in her chest since she was a girl in a house full of hunted revolutionaries. And the revolution was supposed to end the suffering of exactly these people, the peasants, the poor, the forgotten. Instead, it was killing them in their millions, and it was doing so under the signature of the man who shared her bed. She could not wave the reports away as slander because she knew by name and by face the people telling them, and she could not act on them because to repeat them too loudly was to call down ruin on the very students who had trusted her with the truth. So she carried it, in silence, a believer watching her faith curdle into famine, with no altar left to pray at, and no one she was allowed to tell. Imagine that weight. The man in your bed, the father of your children, is the architect of a catastrophe you can no longer unknow, and there is no one on earth you can go to, no court, no press, no escape. To speak is to endanger everyone you love. The idealistic girl who had believed in the revolution was now married to what the revolution had become, and it was breaking her. By 1932, Nadia was living two lives that could not be reconciled. In one, she was a diligent student on the tram, taking notes, sitting exams, believing in the future she was being trained to help build. In the other, she was the wife of the man whose policies were emptying the very villages her classmates came from. The two lives met inside one body, and they tore at it. And she had almost no one. Her mother was distant and difficult. Her brothers and her sister were held at arm's length by the machinery of her husband's life. The handful of friends she still had, women like Polina, were themselves married to powerful men, which meant every confidence she shared was also a risk she took. She could not go to a doctor about her despair without it becoming a report on a desk. She could not weep freely, even in her own home. The most watched woman in the Soviet Union was also one of the loneliest human beings in it, sealed inside the red walls with a grief she was forbidden to name, married to the one man on earth she could never confront and never leave. And slowly, in the autumn of 1932, that truth was closing over her like water. The 8th of November 1932, the Soviet elite gathered to mark the 15th anniversary of the October Revolution, the day that had made them gods of their new world. The celebration was held in the Kremlin apartment of Kliment Voroshilov, one of Stalin's closest allies, a hard man of the Civil War and the inner circle. The room was full of the most powerful people in the country. Food, wine, vodka, toast to the revolution, to the party, to the destruction of its enemies. Nadya was there, beside her husband, and that night, in front of everyone, the marriage cracked open in public. The accounts vary in their details, as they always do, with a scene reconstructed from memory and rumor. But the shape of it is consistent, and it is ugly. The woman across the table was Galina Yegorova, the glamorous wife of a senior Red Army commander, an actress with the kind of easy, showy beauty Nadya did not have and had never wanted. In front of the entire assembled elite, Stalin leaned toward her, laughed with her, played to her. And there was uglier gossip humming under the surface still, a persistent Kremlin rumor that Stalin had been carrying on with a young hairdresser who worked inside the building. Nadya knew what people whispered. Now she had to sit and watch a version of it unfold at the table, on the anniversary of the revolution, ringed by the very wives who would carry the story out into the world by morning. Stalin was drinking. He was, by several accounts, openly flirting with another woman at the table. He was coarse. And when a toast was raised, some say to the destruction of the enemies of the state, Nadya did not lift her glass. Stalin noticed. "Hey, you! Drink!" he barked across the table. Something in her snapped. "I am not a hey to you," she said. By some accounts, he flicked things at her. Cigarette butts, orange peel, small, contemptuous gestures, the kind of casual public humiliation that says, "You are nothing here." In front of the most important people in the Soviet Union, her husband treated her like an irritation to be swatted away, and Nadya did something almost no one dared to do to Stalin. She stood up and she left. She walked out of the banquet in front of them all. Her friend, Polina Zhemchuzhina, herself the wife of a powerful official, hurried after her into the cold Kremlin night. The two women walked and talked, circling the grounds, while Nadya, by Polina's later account, gradually seemed to calm. She spoke of the academy, of the future. She said good night. Polina told her she was being foolish to take it so hard, that in times as hard as these a wife could not simply abandon her husband, and it seemed to work. By Polina's telling, Nadya's fury cooled as they walked, settling into something quieter, something steadier. But quiet is not the same as peace. A woman who is screaming is a woman still fighting. A woman who has gone suddenly calm has sometimes simply stopped fighting, because somewhere inside she has already decided. And she went home to her apartment, alone. That was the last time anyone saw Nadezhda Alliluyeva alive. Quick pause. The Kremlin was extremely good at making inconvenient things quietly disappear, so let's do the exact opposite and hit subscribe. It's the one thing here Stalin's censors never got their hands on. Alright, back to that final night. We do not know exactly what happened in those final hours behind that closed door. No one does. That is part of the horror of it, the silence. What we know is what was found. Sometime in the early hours of the 9th of November, in her room in the Kremlin, Nadya took up a small pistol. It was a delicate thing, a compact German handgun. Most accounts describe a Walter, a weapon brought to her from Berlin as a gift by her own brother Pavel. She had asked for it, they said, for protection during the long nights alone in the apartment, a gift of love that became the instrument of her death. She pointed it at her own heart, and she pulled the trigger. She died there, on the floor of her room, while somewhere down the corridor her husband slept, or paced, or drank. The accounts differ. She was 31 years old. Her children slept nearby. Vasily was 11. Svetlana was 6. Neither of them woke to a single sound that would have told them their mother was gone. There was no cry, no struggle that anyone recorded, only a single shot in the small hours, swallowed by the vast silence of the Kremlin, heard by no one who ever admitted to hearing it. In the morning, it was the housekeeper who found her, the wife of the most powerful man on earth, lying cold beside a fallen pistol, the blood already dark, and beside her a letter. She had left a note. Those few who claimed to have seen it described it as devastating, part personal, part political. A final accounting, not only the grief of a broken marriage, but reproach, an indictment of the man and the things he was doing to the country. We will never read it, because it vanished. Stalin, it is said, took the letter and it was never seen again, hidden or destroyed. Whatever final words Nadya chose, whatever truth she wanted to leave behind, her husband made certain the world would never hear them. Even in death she was silenced. A suicide inside the Kremlin, the leader's own wife. It was unthinkable, not as a tragedy but as an admission, because a suicide asks a question. Why? Why would the wife of the man leading the workers' paradise choose to put a bullet in her own heart? Every possible answer was dangerous, so the regime did what the regime always did. It lied. The official announcement declared that Nadezhda Alliluyeva had died suddenly of illness. An attack of appendicitis, they said. A sad, ordinary death. Nothing more.